527. My name is Eric Martinson. I'm the Public Service Commission's designated moderator for the technical conference. We'll start off with introductions first in the room, and then we'll go to those who are joining us virtually over the phones, and we'll start with Janet Taylor.
Janet Saba, PacifiCorp Rocky Mountain Power.
Jeremy Hershey with the DPU.
Phil Russell with the Utah Association of Energy Users.
Michelle Beck, Office of Consumer Services.
Christine Rock with PacifiCorp.
Daniel Politowski with PacifiCorp.
And Doug Young with PacifiCorp. Start over on him.
Bob Moore, OCS.
I'm Cindy Eckhart. I'm with the Office of Energy Development.
Allison Anderson, OCS.
Tricia Schmidt, AG's Office on behalf of the division.
Patrick Griecu, AG for the DPU.
Chris Parker from DPU.
Jerry Fenn with the Public Service Commission.
And Dave Clark with the PSC.
John Harvey with the PSC as well.
Max Backlund, PacifiCorp.
And then we have a few callers in. Why don't we start with the number beginning in 208, ending in 36?
Hello, this is Nancy Kelly with Western Resource Advocates.
And 608, ending in 64.
Hi, this is David Williams with the division.
Phone number starting in 801, ending in 46.
116.
This is Matt Pernicoli with the division.
Oh, never mind.
Great.
I think 116.
We also have AJ Kumar.
Yes, thank you, with Rocky Mountain Power.
Thank you. Anyone else with PacifiCorp? Mike Wilding, I'm saying?
Yeah, Mike Wilding with PacifiCorp. Thanks for having me. Sorry I couldn't be there today.
Is there anyone else over the phone or present with us who hasn't had a chance to introduce themselves?
Lindsay Mayer, Office of Energy Development.
Welcome. And with that, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Rocky Mountain Power. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to just turn it right over to Kirstine and her team and let them introduce themselves and take us through the slides.
Okay. Thank you for all being here. I'll kick us off, and then we've decided rather than asking you to listen to just one of us talk through all these slides, we thought we'd spruce it up a little bit and have different voices for you to listen on different topics. We'll start out with Mike Wilding, give an overview and talk more about why we chose EDAM and our perspective, kind of an updated perspective on that. We'll then hand over to Danny Politowski on a little bit of just how is the market working. Recognize there's a lot of different folks here and maybe familiarity with EDAM, but we wanted to, our goal is to provide something that's accessible for everybody. So if you know what an LMP is, I apologize and just ignore that, but we wanted to provide the opportunity for a bit of a primer. Then we'll have Doug speak on some of the congestion allocation, and I'll finish up with an overview a little bit on the implementation activities themselves and an invite to some workshops we're having. But I also recognize, so as I mentioned, my name is Kirstine Rock, and I'm formerly the Managing Director for Market Policy and Analytics, but for the last 2 years, really my primary job has been to really focus on the implementation activities. And so we have a kind of a large distributed team. EDAM is very complex, has a lot of different pieces, and what we're finding is that no single human has it all in one head. So hence you have a few humans here today that are all very knowledgeable of their individuals. So with that, I was going to hand over to Mr. Wilding to kick us off. Mike, if you would.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thanks again for having me. I'm Mike Wilding. I'm the Vice President of Energy Supply Management. Together with Christine, been leading the PacifiCorp's market efforts over the last couple of years, and so just appreciate the opportunity to come here. So if we have the slides, if we have the slide deck in front of you, we go to the first slide after the title slide, number 2. And really just kind of set the stage. Anytime we talk about EDAM, we really have to start with EIM, and because EDAM really does build upon the success of EIM. we were the first to join EIM, or the Western Energy Imbalance Market, the WEIM. We like to say we were even before the W. So we started this market in 2014, the very end of 2014, with the California ISO. As you know, it's Energy Imbalance Market, and it's produced more than $7.4 billion of customers' benefits since its inception. PacifiCorp's share of that is actually just over $1 billion. Since that time, like I said, we've been there the whole time. And one of the great things that we don't talk enough about EIM, because of the economic benefits are there, but we don't really talk about the reliability benefits that much. And that automated dispatch and regional coordination that EIM has brought in EDAM, in real time, has really enabled the region to more efficiently use the transmission system to increase that reliability. And there's really two events that I think about when I think about the reliability benefits of EIM. The first is September 2022, a record heat across the West over a Labor Day weekend. So that Tuesday after Labor Day is when we really experienced those record heats. We were seeing record loads for September in Utah in particular. And, because of the way trading works in the WEC, we set up our system the Friday before Labor Day for that Tuesday after Labor Day. So almost 5 days had gone by since we had set up the system. Temperatures continued to rise and the forecast continued to creep up during that time. Outages happened. Just things happened between the time that Friday and that Tuesday. And what we were able to do, and what happened was, on that Tuesday, during the record heat, we were actually an exporter of energy. So, and that never would have happened before EIM, because before EIM, everything was done bilaterally. Everybody was on their own within the hour. And so that excess energy that we had within the hour, we would have had to hold in case something happened. And so we never would have been an exporter before EIM. But then something did happen, is one of our units tripped offline, and in a single 5-minute interval, we went from an exporter to an importer. And so both those things pre-EIM never could have happened, and just kind of illustrates how EIM enhances the reliability of the region. The same thing happened during the January 2024 ice storms. Record cold in the Northwest, experienced a lot of outages because of that cold, and we saw the Northwest importing, 5,000 megawatts of energy each hour on average. A lot of that using the transmission system that was made available in EIM through California, through our system, Nevada, Idaho Power, but more than half of that coming through California's transmission system. So that's really why we chose to join EDAM, just looking at the success of EIM, looking at the benefits that has provided our customers over the last decade, and wanting to build on that success and leverage what we already had to do just more of what we're already doing. And EDAM is the only day-ahead market that could do that. It's the only day-ahead market that could leverage the systems already in place, leverage the existing transmission connectivity, and be all inclusive of the West. The other thing to note is that, the individual balancing authority areas, we continue to maintain our balancing and reliability responsibilities. So this is not an RTO. We're not consolidating balancing authorities. This is just a market, and we continue to maintain those responsibilities. So if we go on to the next slide, you see, just diving a little bit more into EDAM. EDAM is the best tool that we have to lower power costs and manage grid reliability. Like I already said this, but this is the map of EIM and all the transmission connectivity of EIM. Each of those bubbles is a balancing authority area and then the lines between those two is the transmission between the bubbles or circles are the transmission connectivity. And so what EDAM does is just provides an opportunity to more efficiently use the available transmission to optimize all the load and generation across a larger footprint. Right now, EIM is just an intra-hour market and is optimized on a 5-minute and a 15-minute basis. And we get about 3 to 5% of load and generation that's optimized through EIM because you're constrained by what can move within that 5 minutes and within that 15 minutes. Now, when we move that optimization and have not move it, but we have an additional optimization in the day ahead, now we can optimize all load, all generation. We can leverage more transmission to do that. And so essentially what this allows us to do is it provides us more opportunities to buy energy when prices are low, or essentially when prices are below our cost to generate, and more opportunities to sell energy when prices are higher than our cost to generate. Lowers costs for our customers. Everything that we've been able to realize in EIM has been passed back to the customers. We expect about $300 million annually in savings for our customers in EDAM. That won't be right off the bat, not right at first, because the market footprint will need to grow. And on the last slide, you'll see that those EIM benefits really hockey sticked once the footprint starts to grow, and we expect the same thing to happen in EDAM. And then having that better optimization, that day-ahead planning, plus a 7-day trading week will enhance reliability. So like that September event that I talked about, where we set up the system on Friday for Tuesday, we'll now have a trading day every day of the week, and we would be able to re-optimize and set the system up actually on Labor Day for that Tuesday. So allow us to plan better and be ready for those events better as they're happening. And then EDAM continues to value dispatchable generation while also decreasing emissions by allowing more renewables, finding a home for that energy that's being generated. But we can go to the next slide. This provides a little bit of an overview. I won't spend too much time on this. I think we've done technical conferences before on the benefit studies that we did, but this provides 2 studies that we did of the EDAM footprint. You see both the footprint benefits for the entire footprint that we studied for the entire market and both PacifiCorp's. So about 300 million annually, incremental to what we're seeing in EIM. And we can go to slide 5. Maybe one thing that a couple things that I'll hit on here. I've already hit on a lot of these already, but EDAM does create a new product. It's called the Imbalance Reserve product, and that will address the day-ahead uncertainty, and it also will compensate generators for capacity, to hold capacity for that uncertainty. And that Imbalance Reserve product can be sold across the market footprint. So that's a new product, that will enhance reliability and also offer a new revenue source for generators that hold that uncertainty, not only for our load, but for others as well. And then one of the other things that EDAM does is that uncertainty requirement that we're just talking about with the Imbalance Reserve product. The larger the footprint, the more diverse the footprint, EDAM is able to leverage that diversity and that transmission connectivity to reduce that uncertainty requirement through a diversity benefit. So the idea there being the market as a whole, because of that diversity and transmission connectivity, would have to hold back less capacity for that uncertainty between day ahead and real time than you would have to hold on your own to have that same level of reliability. And then EDAM does have a resource sufficiency evaluation. I think we're going to talk more in detail about all of these things. Danny will go into it. but it basically, just like in EIM, it ensures all of us go into the market in each hour sufficient. This will do the same thing in EDAM to ensure that all market participants are sufficient going into the day and into the market, so they have enough resource, enough generation and transmission to serve their own load and uncertainty requirements.
Mike, this is Chris.
So we could,
Can I just chime in real
Yeah.
quick with a question about this last point? So I understand that this RSE test is sort of a day ahead test. How does this mesh, if at all, with RAP program or the ISO zone resource adequacy tests? I mean, obviously those are a longer time horizon, but what's sort of the interplay there in how you count some of those things?
Yeah, that's a good question. The interplay is, you hit on the big one, is the RAP and the resource adequacy is a longer term horizon. And so that's more, in RAP it's 9 months out. You're looking, ensuring that you have enough capacity on the system to meet your load plus a planning reserve margin. In EDAM, it'll be a daily test to make sure that you're bidding enough resources to meet both your load plus a uncertainty requirement. So it will be different. Now, if you are a participant in RAP, there will be some interplay where RAP could impose upon an entity an obligation to help out a long entity to help out a short entity in the day ahead. And so that could add to the resource sufficiency evaluation, because now you would have an export going out, a self-scheduled export that you also need to show that you have enough resources for. So that could add to your RSE requirement. Or if you are a short entity in the day ahead and a RAP participant, you could have a import coming in from another RAP participant to fill that short for the program requirements, and you could use that import to pass the RSE.
Okay, and the ISO, my understanding is, has incorporated or will kind of harmonize with the RAP test to accredit those things appropriately there, right? So my only other question is then, like, I'm just trying to get a sense of what it looks like day in and day out when you, like in Q3, for instance, when you're buying a lot of power. I assume you bid all of that kind of into EDAM, and then sort of like grid used to do, EDAM will settle what it's going to settle, right? And you'll take what's in the money and leave what's not.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm tracking the question or what the like.
So,
when you say,
obviously, when we talk about this, a lot of the time we talk about like your own generators, right? So but you're bringing more than just generators as assets to meet your load and pass this RSE test. So, I guess what I'm getting at is you will bid in your whole set of resources, and the market's going to pick what it's going to pick from there in the EDAM, right? And so you may have a set of contracts that don't get picked for this period or that period or the other period, and that's fine, and you can see if you can do anything with those in the EIM the next day. Is that kind of how that would shake out?
yes, and I mean the contract, the terms and conditions of the contract also play into that as well, right? So some, for example, we have, we're the off taker, or so. But yes, that would be a self-schedule, which is just a price taker bid in the market. So if prices, and prices could be above or below whatever the contract prices be, but we would be the entity, the scheduling coordinator, and we would settle those prices.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Let's go to slide 6 now. EDAM or Markets Plus. So just kind of give you an overview of the outlay, what's going on. I think probably some of you are aware that there's a competing day ahead and real-time market in the West that's offered by the Southwest Power Pool. that's called Markets Plus. And I think one important thing to note is we talk a lot about a day-ahead market decision, but this is also a real-time market decision. So entities that are committed and that will join Markets Plus or do join Markets Plus will also leave EIM. And so the Market Plus entities are there. You can see them in that kind of brick red, kind of clay color. And then the blue entities, the dark blue entities, are the entities that have either signed an implementation agreement with EDAM and or have indicated publicly that they are, joining EDAM and, working through internal and external procedures and processes to finalize that. I do notice that we did miss CID over below Bank and to the left of Kaizo. They've signed an implementation agreement. But so we have a really good footprint here for EDAM. And I've said this a lot, but market benefits are driven by transmission connectivity and load and resource diversity, and EDAM delivers on both. The EDAM footprint is 46% of the load in WEC. It includes 80% of the solar generation, 70% of the battery storage, 68% of the wind generation. You add our thermal fleet to that, and you have significant generation diversity. And then just looking at this map, you can see that EDAM, provides the greatest transmission connectivity. And when we talk about like that storm in the Northwest in January, we really see the importance of that that interregional transmission connectivity that can kind of happen through us, Idaho, Nevada, and then a lot through the California ISO. So next
Mike,
slide.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
If you want to save our questions to the end, I can do that, but or just ask now. That would better for me.
No, go ahead.
All right, thanks. So with the EDAM footprint of 46% of the load in the West, is that that's obviously counting PacifiCorp? Is that right?
Yep.
And then how much of that is PacifiCorp? You know?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't know.
Yeah, what I kind of was wondering was like if we knew like if PacifiCorp hypothetically was in Markets Plus, would that shift the balance of power to Markets? I mean, no pun intended there, but would that shift it to Markets Plus to have then the bigger advantage? Because it seems like PacifiCorp is a big player in the West.
Yeah, we definitely are a big player in the West, and I'm like even trying to Google and see what the average load in the WEC is, but I can't find it and talk at the same time. So, California is probably about 3.5, maybe 4 times the size of us, and then after California, it's us. But I mean, the load is one side of it, and the transmission connectivity is the other side of it. And I really it's us and the California ISO, but the California ISO has more capability to move transmission between the regions than anyone else, and that's why they're such an important partner.
Mike, are you done?
No, I was just gonna say thanks.
Oh, okay. Sorry, before you go on, this is Michelle Beck. Before you go on, I had a comment, a quick comment and another question. So, we do need to remember the stuff you skipped over in this presentation about the economic analysis of joining the different markets, and that gets to what he was saying about the transmission connectivity. It's not the same. Like, it doesn't shift the power. It wouldn't shift the balance if PacifiCorp changed, because it can't create new pathways, like that's the transmission connectivity side of it. But then, Mike, I just had a more simple question. I'm trying to understand the color coding on this page. Like, so I get the lighter blue and the darker blue, but like, what's Nevada Power and PNM? They kind of seem like they're in between colors.
Oh, yeah, I think maybe we got a little fancy there. And we probably need to update it. P&M, they've signed an implementation agreement, so we should darken them. I think Nevada and Idaho Power and Walk, they haven't signed implementation agreements, but they publicly said, hey, we're joining EDAM, or, this is kind of what we're working towards. And so I think Nevada will see something more affirmative from them in the next couple months at their commission. And so I think it was just to kind of show the dark blue have signed implementation agreements and are actively working towards implementation, and the other ones are still earlier in the process.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
And I have one other, this is John Harvey with the commission. Is this map just the balancing area authorities that are in the Western Energy Imbalance Market? This isn't the whole West.
Yes.
So if you have the whole.
Right, yeah, so it doesn't have PSCO or those, it's just the Energy Imbalance Market.
And so most of the ones to the west of this diagram are Thinking Markets Plus?
Do you mean
to
the
east?
We do have
east, east, yes, east.
To the east.
Yeah.
But there
Yeah, I
aren't
knew
that
what you
many.
meant. Sorry.
How many, Mike, how many are left off? This is still most.
You got all Colorado.
Yeah, not that many.
Colorado is
Yeah, Colorado, PSCO, WAPA in Colorado. So WAPA's actually joining RTO West. So that's going to be just that balancing area is going to be part of a RTO, become an RTO that is operated by SPP, and then PSCO has just recently announced that they would join Markets Plus. Okay, if we go to the next slide, just looking at kind of that transmission connectivity and who we trade with. This kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at when we, to Michelle's point earlier, those transmission paths that are kind of most valuable to us. So when we look at PacWest on the left, our trade partners on the right, about 3 times our trade partners are going. We have 3 times more trading with our EDAM trade partners than we do with our Markets Plus trade partners. And then we see Avista and Avangrid. They also provide value to us and our good trade partners. They have not announced that they're joining either day-ahead market and so we assume they're staying in the IM for right now. You can see the PacWest, the PACE there. That does create a good chunk of our trades. Some of that is using our own transmission, but some of that is also with being able to leverage additional transmission that, Idaho Power specifically would bring to the market that allows for more transfers between PacWest and PACE than we would be able to do on our own. So that's why we have both our BAs on this as well. And then if you look at the next slide, have the same thing with PACE. So again, Nevada, Idaho Power, LA, all EDAM participants, great trade partners. Unfortunately, Arizona, they are a big trade partner for us, and they're going to Markets Plus. So there's going to be a seam there that's going to make that a less of efficient transfer point. I'll say some of that Arizona and even Nevada is creating that connectivity to the CAISO. But recently, the CAISO was able to procure transmission to Mona, so we are working right now as we speak as part of the EDAM implementation, having a transfer point at Mona directly with the CAISO. So hopefully on day one, we will have a connection at the COI, the California-Oregon Intertie, and a connection at Mona that will kind of bring that full circle with EDAM participants. And then obviously as Nevada joins, as LA joins, that will just open up the pipes even more. We've talked a lot about how customers benefit. I mean, really, there's no losers in EDAM and in the markets because of what we talked about. Like, really opens up that transmission system, allows a greater optimization. We can sell when prices are above our cost of energy, our cost to produce, and buy when below our cost to produce. And then if we go to the next slide, slide 10, just really quick, a couple of fairly significant updates over the last couple months, couple weeks. So on August 29th, PacifiCorp, we received approval of our tariff changes to our oat that will allow us to participate in the day-ahead market. I think all of you are aware there was kind of fairly significant protests, not unlike when we joined EIM, but FERC, we received a fairly clean order from FERC. We will be making a compliance filing on Monday. That compliance filing and what we were ordered from FERC was almost exclusively just clarifications, a few cleanup items, a typo that we needed to change, to correct, but that will be filed on Monday. PGE also filed their tariff shortly after us. Theirs was also approved. It largely similar to our tariff. And then the CAISO did, and Doug will go into this more, but in response to our tariff and some of the issues that were raised, they changed their tariff on the congestion allocation within the market. But Doug will talk more about that. And then just, I think last Friday, Governor Newsom in California signed the AB 825, which is also known as the Pathways Bill. This has been more than a decade in the making, which is allowing the CAISO to transition its governance to new independent regional organization. I know some folks here in this room, and Michelle has worked on the launch committee in Pathways to, make that happen. So we really appreciate that work, and I think this is a big step for the region and a big deal. As soon as New Mexico signed the implementation agreement, just kind of maybe taking a step back, as soon as New Mexico signed the implementation agreement, the governance step one of the governance change did take effect, which moved the WEIM governing body from a joint authority to a primary authority, so they have 205 rights at FERC and can make tariff changes. And then this Pathways Bill, the AB 825, allows the regional organization to be formed. I heard somebody say all we did was give ourselves the ability to all do a bunch of work. So still a lot of work to do, but a huge deal and a big update, and really appreciate everyone that worked on that. And then I'll just one other thing, EDAM is voluntary, as with EIM, that voluntary nature did carry over. So the balancing authority, the voluntary nature lies with the balancing authority area, and it can decide to leave without any penalty. So that you just need a 6-month notice to leave. And then even as we are onboarding and going through EDAM, there are lots of exit and off ramps if, things aren't working well or aren't working as intended. Right now we're doing scenario testing and we'll do parallel ops, and be able to review those before we go live. And then even after we go live, especially in the first couple of years, there are off ramps if something happens unexpected or that we weren't anticipating. So I think that's an important part of this market as well. But with that, unless anyone has any questions for me, I'm going to turn it over to Danny to kind of walk through how the market works. And yeah.
Can I just really quickly, you guys had, I think it was Brattle did a study for you a couple of years ago on EDAM.
Yep.
And I don't remember the numbers from that, but I remember asking, I think it was Hans, kind of how much you leave on the table only going to EDAM and not going fully to an RTO. And obviously that's an impossible question to answer with precision right now. But maybe you could talk just really briefly about what's left for that next step and what might cause you to go there.
Yeah, that's a good question too. The state LUD study, I think, said you capture about 80% of the benefits of an RTO in a day-ahead market, maybe 70 to 80%. I can't remember exactly, but it was a high number, 70 to 80%. And so what's left in the RTO is, BA consolidation, which could be, fewer reserves, some operational benefits there, transmission planning, a few things like that. So really day-ahead market takes a big step towards that. And so as far as what would cause us to go to a full RTO, I mean, we do not have any plans to move to a full RTO right now, but, I would say that's something we would continue to evaluate. Obviously, the governance is a big piece, but California just allowed the governance, the independent governance for the market, but not for the entire BA, which sets a level playing field for all of us, right? But if you were to consolidate the BAs, you'd have to think about governance again. If you were going to do that with California, there's maybe other ways and intermediate steps you could go. But I would say right now there's no plans for an RTO. But we're always looking. We'll be evaluating whatever comes across.
Hey Mike, before we move on, I've got a quick question. This is Phil with ED. You mentioned New Mexico's recent decision to join EDAM and how that had implications for the Pathways Initiative. Going back to the maps of the transmission connectivity, I'm a little curious about that decision. Particularly given what we're saying about PacifiCorp's connectivity with everybody else in the Western markets. PNM doesn't appear to have a ton of connectivity to the others that are committed. I'm not going to ask you to sort of articulate their reasons, but other than transmission connectivity, is there some reason to be in EDAM versus Markets Plus?
Well, yeah, I think transmission connectivity is a big driver. I will say from PNM's perspective, I don't want to speak for PNM, but the SunZia line, that new line that's being built enables connectivity to the CAISO. We're actually also working on connectivity to PACE at Four Corners that would add a line between New Mexico and PacifiCorp. And the transmission's already there. But one of the good things about EDAM is it's given us a good reason to review all of our transmission connections, right? And that was one where we said, hey, why don't we have a connection with New Mexico at Four Corners? And so we're working on that right now. And so we hope that we will have that by the time we're live in EDAM. And then that SunZia line really facilitates. And then they do have some connection with CAISO in the Palo Verde area as well. That will be kind of a direct connection.
And Mike, didn't they do an economic study as well?
They did, yeah, and it did have those connections in it, and their economic study showed that EDAM was the benefit, was greater benefit to their customers.
All right, thanks, that was helpful.
Mike, this is Jerry Fenn from the commission. I just want to go back
Hi.
to slide 9. The discussion on the reduction in net power costs. So I wonder if you could explain that a little bit more. I'm wondering if if you anticipate this will result in any change in your hedging policies, particularly with respect to physical hedges on purchase power agreements, given the requirement, I guess EDAM has that you pass this resource efficiency evaluation test, that you bring enough supply to meet the next day's obligations. Can you just explain a little bit more about how EDAM will reduce net power costs and whether you anticipate any changes in your hedging policies?
Yes. So again, it's that larger optimization. So right now in EIM, for example, if your natural gas plant is able to generate at a price below the LMP or the market price, then that gas plant would be dispatched up, but you're constrained by, how fast it can move in that 5 or 15-minute optimization. So, for example, that gas plant could be serving another area outside of PacifiCorp, but it might have 200 megawatts of capacity because we didn't need all of that capacity to serve our own loads, and so in EIM it will dispatch it up, but it's, like I said, constrained by how fast it can move. And so, but that money that it makes, that margin that it makes on that off-system sell in EIM flows back to customers in our net power cost. And now in EDAM, so you have that 200 megawatts of excess capacity. Now you could export all of that in EDAM because now you're not constrained by what can move in that 5 or 15 minutes. So you are able to sell more when you can generate below the market price and pick up a margin. And then the same is true right now. So with like during solar hours, for example, in EIM today, we have to optimize our system going into the market. We have to show that we have enough resources to meet our own load. California might have excess solar energy that at some point sometimes can be like single-digit pricing and even negative pricing. And so we will import it as much of that as we can, but because we come into the hour balance with our load and our resources matching our own load, we can only import as much as we can, bring down our existing resources that are higher priced to take in that sometimes even negative priced energy. Well, now in the day ahead, you're not constrained by what can move in that 5 or 15 minutes. You can just schedule it low and schedule that import. And so that's what will drive power costs down. And then as far as like the hedging policies, we are making some updates to hedging policies. I think we have something on the books later in October where myself and John Fritz are going to come down and talk about kind of what we're thinking and have a proposal there. But when I talked about the uncertainty requirement and that diversity benefit, so being able to leverage the market to hold less reserves and less uncertain and have a lower uncertainty requirement will have a direct impact on the amount that we need to purchase. So it should lower that amount that we need to purchase.
I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, but so My understanding is if an entity fails to meet the resource sufficiency evaluation test, that they can be hit with a surcharge. Can you explain more about that? How does that balance out with respect to decisions to, for example, to purchase these longer term contracts so that you have adequate resources available for 1 or 2 peak days in the middle of the summer, or if you didn't come to the market with the adequate resources for a given day in the day ahead market, what type of penalty or surcharge would you be facing?
Yeah, hey Danny, do you have that in your slides? Do you go through the different tiers of the
I do, yeah.
penalties? Okay, so Commissioner, can we
We can, let's wait.
can we put
I'm
a pin
sorry.
in that?
Like I said, I didn't
Yeah.
want to get too much
Yeah.
in the weeds, but you'll explain it.
Yeah, Danny will go
Okay.
through that.
All right, thank you.
And this is Dave Clark. I've got a question too, if I may. It's a good time to interject.
Yeah.
Is it possible to go back to either the event that was in the Washington, Oregon area of extremely high heat during the summer of, I can't remember, it was 2023 or 4, or one of the winter storms, these extreme demands on the system that I'm wondering if you could go back to that and say, if we've been in EDAM, this is how the costs that we incurred would have been different, higher or lower. Is that an exercise that's possible? To me, it would be quite interesting to, as a sort of a way to evaluate what EDAM's likely to do.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be possible to do, and I mean, and there's so many variables, and I'll think about that, and let me maybe talk to the CAISO about that. But one of the things that I can, and one of the things that I did mention, just a huge benefit is just the mechanics of the market and just the fact that it's a daily market. So like I said, in actually both that winter storm event, that ice storm, was over Martin Luther King Day weekend, and then the Labor Day event in 2022 was obviously on Labor Day. And what I've learned in this position over the last 5 or 6 years is we can handle things so much better if we have time to plan for it. And what happens on those holiday weekends, or even on a regular weekend, with not having a daily market and being able to trade daily, is things change on you that you can't plan and you've already set up for. And so you are very limited in the changes that you can make. And that's also one of the reasons why we're involved in the natural gas and power coordination and trying to get those two markets more aligned. But so just the fact that you have a 7-day market is going to be huge for events like that.
Well, and I understand the conclusion, but it would help me to verify that conclusion if I could understand, what would have happened in an event that where the facts exist already.
Yeah.
Or maybe something hypothetical, but that sort of is representative of these extreme cases that tend to create the most upward pressure on net power costs.
Hey, Mike, if I
Okay.
this one,
I'll take that. Go ahead, Doug. Yeah.
Just little data points there in terms of that. So say in January of 2024 with the big MLK Day storm, you know, if you look at how that impacted us, Mike's shop had to, you know, enter into a number of day-ahead purchases where we paid day-ahead prices for ice, Palo Verde, for example. You know, and I think, Mike, when you look at the quantity or the dollar amount that we had to pay in those day-ahead purchases, so if we were instead in the EDAM, you know, with that we had, I guess, limited trading partners, limited liquidity on who we could go to get energy at that point in time in the bilateral day-ahead market. I guess if we were in the EDAM, you know, we would have been able to leverage all the transfer points. You know, CAISO's optimization model could have probably identified additional trading partners, so we definitely would have had more choices and diversity to rely on at that kind of crucial point.
Well, if you're at the EDAM, I mean, in theory, you wouldn't have to do much of any of that because the market's going to do it. And you're just going to get a ramp up or ramp down order, right? You don't have to go find partners if you're in EDAM. Do you?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
You agree with that, right, Mike? In terms of the response to an MLK Day storm, it would be the optimization model rather than us making day-ahead decisions? Or is there still?
Yeah, largely, yeah.
Okay, yeah, if there's no more questions on that, I'm going to go into more of a kind of one-on-one on some of the different market aspects, but recognizing that there's likely some varying levels of understanding in the room. So for me, it's useful to think of EDAM as just an extension of the EIM into an earlier time horizon. So these different kind of aspects of the market, obviously with EDAM, you still have a real-time market. You just have the addition of a day-ahead market. In terms of kind of resource participation, in the EIM we have this concept of participating resources, which are economically bid, or they can be self-scheduled. And then there's also this notion of a non-participating resource, which is just base scheduled into the market, at kind of a fixed hourly quantity. In EDAM, this concept of a non-participating resource goes away. So all resources are participating in the market and load, and it's either participating with an economic bid or a self-schedule. There's this concept of load participation. So with EDAM, you know, load is reflected through these hourly base load schedules to help facilitate imbalance settlement. In EDAM, the load will be participating. It can be economically bid or self-scheduled into the day-ahead market. You know, this concept of a nodal LMP, which I'll go a little bit more into in a couple slides, that's existed in EIM and is present in other organized markets in the US. With EDAM, right, we still have a 5-minute and a 15-minute LMP with the addition of an hourly day-ahead LMP. And then settlements, you know, a lot of our real-time market settlements will continue to exist with slight modifications, and then we've got the addition of kind of a day-ahead real-time market settlement now for those day-ahead awards and any changes that happen with the redispatch of the real-time market. Going on to,
Quick.
oh, yeah.
This is John Harvey from the commission. So on the, let's say all resources are now participating. Our regulatory model is cost of service. How do we ensure that a low-cost resource that's owned by PacifiCorp is providing all the benefits it should be to the PacifiCorp customers, particularly the Utah customers?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So, similarly to, you know, we'll take a wind facility in Wyoming or in Rocky Mountain Power. You know, that facility today might be, you know, a lot of those are bid into EIM already today. And essentially what, you know, by participating in EDAM, it just means that that generator is going to get paid for its output, the entirety of its output in the market. So, you know, if you have a wind resource, the cost to PacifiCorp of that wind resource per megawatt might be, you know, negative $40, reflecting any production tax credits or renewable energy credits that we receive. So essentially what that means is that, you know, this resource will be bid into the market, and if prices are above negative $40, that resource will be selected by the market, dispatched, and paid, you know, a price that is greater than the cost to PacifiCorp. If prices are for some reason, you know, negative, and this resource is actually contributing to congestion or something, that's when we might see an economic curtailment. But essentially, participating just means that we're getting paid for the resources, the entirety of the resources output in EDAM.
Well, right, but then the PacifiCorp load for the PacifiCorp customers that would have been served by that at the low price, they're now being charged the full market price. So, I mean, isn't it a wash in the settlements?
For the the costs of running our resources or the imports in from other kind of balancing authority areas all will go into the cost of service still. So it's still a cost-based recovery that we're looking for. The EDAM is just performing the optimization to get the better stack and determine which resources are the lowest cost. Right now, when we set up the day ahead in our PCI model, it doesn't have the benefit of seeing every CAISO's BA and everybody else's BA and factoring that into, okay, when we set up the day ahead, we're going to turn this plan on and this plan on. With the EDAM, CAISO will have the benefit of every other resource and the other BAs, and they'll say, well, this PacifiCorp's resource is a little more expensive, then we could bring in the free solar instead. But that'll all be factored in, the settlement statements that we pay the CAISO will all be, it'll have all the resources and the load costs.
Yeah, so I understand if PacifiCorp has a resource they get to turn off.
Yeah.
Because the market price is more favorable, that we're unambiguously better off in that case. Well,
Yeah.
possibly, it depends on depreciation and a lot of other costs, but assuming it's a significant margin, we're unambiguously better off. My question is, if PacifiCorp is the low cost, and their cost is well below market, yeah, they're getting paid that market price for their generation, but the load that PacifiCorp has to serve is also getting billed the market price.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they talk about we're gonna get all this extra revenue, but we're also getting a lot of extra cost. So, I mean, doesn't that just wash in the settlements?
That does wash through things that they call that neutrality payments. They make sure to the extent, particularly when it's just our gen meeting our own load, if there's price differentials on that, it does all get returned to us. So we are kind of neutral with respect to the optimization that happens in our own BA. It's just kind of, so all the CAISO statements really just net out to, did we end up exporting to somebody else? We'll get paid for that. Or did we bring an import in? We'll have to pay for that. All the optimization internally kind of all nets out to zero. Because nobody else deserves to be paid for our lower cost resource, meaning our load, even though maybe there's some congestion that made load pay more than the resource. CAISO knows that the people that deserve that price difference is our BA, so it returns it back to us to redistribute back out. So yeah, it's there is no like markup where dollars are going to different balancing authority areas that don't deserve it.
So, but there is some transaction cost to just being part of EDAM.
Just say there's a grid management charge. Just for CAISO doesn't run its optimization model for us for free, so there is a grid management charge that's meant to reimburse them for their systems and their headcount and things like that.
Thanks.
Yep.
One follow-up question, this maybe just get kicked to another slide. We've been talking about how the benefits or costs get distributed through, the dispatch of certain resources. Kind of maybe in rank order, happens prior to that is prices are assigned to various resources, which then signal whether those resources run or not. Are we going to talk about how those prices are set when we get to that LMP slide?
Yes.
Okay.
This one I'm just going to touch really quickly. So again, EDAM participation, just like Liam, is at the balancing authority area level. And again, all resources are participating, so all the load and resources is modeled, and the participation in the market is facilitated through scheduling coordinators who essentially bid or self-schedule the generators and load that they represent.
Can I ask just a?
Yes.
It's a really technical question, but once PacifiCorp said we're joining EDAM, then everything in their balancing area is also joining, right? So we've got the municipals who are in your balancing area, who said they want to do some things with Markets Plus. How does that work out? I'm curious.
They, the transmission customers, since they are in our balancing authority area, cannot be just carved out to go to Markets Plus, so they are kind of in our area. So subject to the rules of our tariff, so they're, you know, they can economically bid in their generators. It would be into the EDAM, can't bid them into Markets Plus. So, and then, you know, their kind of load will be served through the market optimization model, so they all join the EDAM as well. So yes, we've had a lot of outreach to the transmission customers, you know, going back for since the beginning here, and because you know they all were interveners in our tariff proceeding, and so yeah.
And that gets to that point, right, is that's one other angle to this, is the transmission, the congestion revenues, all the transmission revenues is sort of a sticky, goofy thing, and I think you have slides on that later, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our point-to-point customers, network customers like the, you know, Deseret, UAM, Sumpa, all them, you know, we've had there's a huge impact on them as well. So we've been trying to help them along here.
And you mentioned earlier, like the very first slide, might have even been the first point you made about the distinction between EIM and EDAM. At least one of them is that in EIM there is this concept of non-participating resources. So, you know, maybe, you know, if you carried that concept over to EDAM, you know, maybe they'd be captured within EDAM because the decision's made at the BAA level, but they could opt the resources out. But they can't do that because there are no such thing as non-participating resources here, right?
Yeah, well, they could, they still could just self-schedule their resource as they do today.
Right.
But yeah, EDAM really is just giving them the benefit of economic bidding. Out of the whole participating versus non-participating is, you know, they could act as if they kind of did today, but they have to take a little bit more ownership in terms of them submitting their schedules, being in the EDAM now we're requiring them to be their own scheduling coordinator for their generators versus in the EIM we kind of took care of a lot of the stuff for them. If they didn't, you know, since it was a new market, a lot of them didn't want to kind of be part of it, so, you know, we gave a lot of concessions in the EIM that, you know, we'll do the scheduling or we'll do this for you. But in EDAM, we're kind of trying to make it more where they're separate scheduling coordinators. They take care of their own generators. You know, they have the option to economically bid, which is a great benefit for them. You know, if they were just still under us and us taking care of them, there's no way we could let them economically bid, because that means like they would give their economic bids to us, we would see them, and then we would pass them to the market. So it made sense to be kind of separate. So, one more question?
So, yeah, let's go back to that slide 14, because you were gonna address the issue of surcharges, and that may be in this place where you addressed it, but we didn't talk about it much.
Yeah, I'm gonna go into this slide right now.
Okay.
And let's see if I cover it. So what was, you know, really important with EDAM is that it's not, the purpose of EDAM is not to replace, you know, sufficient forward planning and procurement activities from the utility. It's optimizing transmission and capacity that the market brings, but in order to, you know, facilitate confidence in these market transfers that there is capacity that they will flow in real time, this concept of a kind of shared resource efficiency evaluation where everyone is held to the same kind of metrics of resource efficiency was really important in the stakeholder process in kind of the development of EDAM. So this is kind of, you know, what that looks like. The resource efficiency evaluation evaluates your position across each of the 24 hours in the next day, and this includes your forecasted load as an obligation, an imbalance observed requirement. This is based on historical load and variable energy resource uncertainty, as well as your ancillary service obligation. So each entity is going to have to prove that they are sufficient each hour prior to the market running. Like we pointed out earlier, there is a penalty for this, so depending on the magnitude of the failure for each hour and depending on what hour. So let's assume, you know, the majority of the time we expect if someone fails, it'll be an upward failure where you maybe don't have enough capacity and you fall 100 megawatts short of kind of your obligation for the peak net load hour of the day. So if that failure was, you know, less than 10 megawatts, that's considered de minimis, so there's no surcharge for that. If it is, you know, there are two tiers beyond that that are these multipliers. So essentially what the surcharge is meant to reflect is the cost of you curing this deficiency on your own. So the way that the calculation breaks out is essentially, you know, if you fail for an on-peak hour, the cost is based on your cost to go procure a 16-hour bilateral block purchase, which is what, you know, we're often doing in Q3 on those hot days. And then, you know, if you fail, essentially what the multiplier is just, it's an addition on top of that to make you essentially better off to go cure that on your own before you get to the market, rather than go into the RSE and rely on the market to cure that for you. So if you fail by less than 50% of your imbalance reserve obligation, the multiplier is 1.25. And if you fail by more than 50% of your imbalance reserve obligation, that's considered a severe failure, and it's a 2.0 multiplier. And finally, kind of after you pass the EDAM RSE, these EDAM entities are grouped together going into real time. So the WEAM RSE that we're in today, we're evaluated on our own each hour. Because in the EDAM RSE, we're kind of going away from this notion that you have to come in kind of completely sufficient by yourself each hour. We're allowing plants to be, you know, back down and fill those with EDAM transfers. So we're now going to be evaluated as a pool in real time. Any questions on this slide?
Could I perhaps just add one more? You asked earlier a question about the penalties versus having to pass the RC, right? So one of the things just maybe highlighting here, between 6 a.m. when we designed a lot of this with the CAISO, between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., the BA will get advisory runs every half an hour. So really that's eight options in 8 chances to really dial. You get partial information and better updated information that becomes more and more accurate. So really the design here for the RSE is that there, we believe, are sufficient, if not maybe too many chances, you know, to really have everything in line to pass the RSE, such that the benefits of the better optimization, you know, there shouldn't be you would be getting more benefits from the optimization benefits in net versus having any kind of fear of not passing and being surprised perhaps as the BA to not be able to pass your RSE. So just wanted to maybe add that.
Thank you, and that reminded me of something that I meant to call out, that this in many ways mirrors our current practices today. So this is not, you know, a new concept for PacifiCorp in our day-ahead setup processes. And, you know, one thing I should call out is that the imbalance reserve uncertainty requirement reflects the diversity benefit that we get from being pooled with EDAM. So it is lower than, you know, the requirement that we would be held to, you know, on our own. Yes.
Well, now this is the economist in me talking. I always think cost benefit and, you know, how to optimize. Is it possible that instead of buying a really long-term contract that you're paying on every day for a month, that you just say, I'd rather pay the penalty on the needle days? That's what I was trying to get.
That's where that kind of the whole multiplier logic behind that was for the people that would say, well, I'm just, you know, I know I'm short, but, you know, I'm gonna, instead of going to Mid-Sea or Palo Verde and buying enough to cover that, I'll just let the market solve for it. So yeah, we couldn't let the penalty just be the Palo Verde day-ahead price. We had to get the 1.25 multiplier, 1.5 multiplier. So I know, just to disincentivize people from knowingly coming short, if that was your question, or maybe I'm missing it.
It's a little deeper than that, because I understand if you were doing it day to day, that absolutely you'd rather do the market and cure it yourself than pay 2 times. But if you're buying these month-long or longer contracts that you're basically calling on for a few days of that month, it seems to me to be a lot cheaper to pay the penalty, by maybe 15 times cheaper. That's the trade-off I'm wondering about. And that may go to this hedging conference you said we're gonna have in October. But that's the type of trade-off I'm curious about.
Yeah.
There's additional penalties as well, right? And so it's in that consideration too. We, historically, we've always came in sufficient. Leaving yourself insufficient. There's other, not just this RC penalty, but other kind of consequences that.
Yeah, the other thing that you risk there, right, is that they're on those hot days, right? You risk, there might not be sufficient capacity in the market, so we wouldn't want to avoid sufficient forward procurement and then essentially rely on the market to cure this deficiency for us. And it's 114 in Sacramento, and there's no capacity for us to import from the market. So that's one kind of thing to consider there. Okay. Just quick on load and resource participation. So both in EDAM, both load and resources can participate with either economic bids or self-schedules. And so these two both feed into kind of how we calculate the prices in the market, which I'm going to just quickly talk about these bids and what they look like on slide 16 here. So for an example of a supply bid, so there's two different types for a generator in EDAM. They're the financial or economic and self-schedule. So to talk about financial, the curve here goes from kind of the P-min of the resource, which in this case is 100 megawatts, up into the P-max of 600. And the key here is that essentially the phrasing is monotonically non-decreasing. Essentially, just the higher the price, greater the willingness to provide more. And resource that might be depicted here. This could be considered kind of like a hydro plant, with these kind of steep kind of steps up. Like you have reservoir hydro that you can shift on different hours of the day. A gas plant would likely have a smoother curve. And the other thing with supply bids is that most hours they're subject to a bid cap in the market of $1,000 a megawatt hour. And then we have on the other side self-schedules. So these are price takers. It's a megawatt bid without prices. So something I think of here is like a run-of-river hydro. Okay, so what I want to kind of point out here is that when we determine the price of energy for a given hour in EDAM, the market considers kind of the entire available bid stack to serve that location. So in this these are stylized supply and demand curves, but in this example, a majority of demand is self-scheduled, and you have about 5,000 megawatts of supply that is self-scheduled. And then above that, you've got these demand bids, and essentially in the second graph to the right where we zoom in on the intersection of these, this is kind of where we would find the marginal cost of energy. So on this day, in the market, they would have cleared 19,250 megawatts at a clearing price of $60 a megawatt hour. So this is one component of the LMP, but it's a big component, and essentially what this means is that every generator to the left, and this is a simplified example, but every generator to the left of this kind of clearing price, by pricing it at the marginal cost of energy, all those generators are covered on their costs, and this would be the price that load and resources would pay for energy. Or sorry, it would be the price that load pays for energy and the price that generators are paid for supplying.
Can you pause right there on the, I'm confused about the self-schedule on the supply side of things. When you say willing to pay $155 per megawatt hour, what does that mean in this context?
Yeah, what that means is that on some hours, you can imagine when load might be really low, and generation could be really high. If there's, lots of resources that have to generate, essentially they're saying this energy has to move, so that price, that negative 155 is just the price floor. So I've never seen that actually happening. Typically the lowest prices we see are between 0 and negative 50, where you would see like a wind farm, but that's just what that means, is that even if price is cleared at the price floor, if you're a self-schedule, you're saying, I want an award even if prices are down there.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, if you've got a load serving entity who wants to self-schedule one or more of its resources, in my head, I obviously don't understand this as well as you do, one of the reasons they might want to do that is they want to be immune from EDAM pricing because they've got what they feel like is already a good price on it. Can they be? Is there any universe in which, you know, one of these, we were just talking about some of the entities who are not the VA who have sort of been opted into this, and that while they can't opt resources out, they can self-schedule. Does that mean that when they do that, they are not subject to pricing that's set by somebody else?
No, self-scheduling wouldn't make you immune from pricing. It would, what it essentially does is it allows you to decide the quantity that you want to generate on a given hour. So if you've set up your system, you know, some of these might be imports, you know, self-schedule, it's a quantity that has to flow.
Run of the river hydro and all of our qualifying facilities that we can't really dispatch or just gonna be self.
Right, yeah, you can't dispatch it down, yeah, sure.
Could you go back to that for 1 second? I'm really gonna demonstrate ignorance with this.
Oh good, I'm not the only one.
It's always bothered me that everybody gets the market clearing price, even, you know, the entity that's willing to sell for $30 a megawatt hour or whatever it is, whatever we're talking about. And so why can't a market be constructed where you get paid what you are willing to offer your resources for, rather than some huge, potentially large premium over that because the market finally clears at a much higher price?
Economics question.
It's an interesting question. Yeah. I'm trying to think of what the graph would look like if we had that.
Well, the graph that I see in my mind is if you take a straight line at $60 and start on the vertical axis and just draw it over to where you reach the market clearing price, that all seems to me to be unsupportable costs to customers because of the way that the pricing process is constructed.
But a lot of that is different when you have the customers essentially owning the generation. So then, you know, when you've got a vertically integrated utility, then both the potential windfall profits to those generators are flowing back to the same customers. So I feel like that's an incredibly important question in the markets where the generators have been divested off and are not connected to the customers.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
But
exactly.
it doesn't have quite the same effect,
Sure.
in my opinion, when we've got a vertically integrated utility.
Sure.
And maybe I could jump into if that's, I think in that scenario, Commissioner, where you know, not everyone received the marginal price, the clearing price, and you received your bid, by using the marginal price, there is an incentive to bid your cost, because when you bid your cost, if prices are above your cost, you can gain a margin. If prices are below your cost, you can avoid your cost, and for a load serving entity, you can, you know, purchase, or if you're a, you know, or if you're a buyer, you can avoid your generation cost. I think in a market where you received your bid, regardless of where, as long as it fell under the marginal cost, you wouldn't have that incentive to bid your cost. You'd have that incentive to chase revenues and to chase, especially if you were, you know, disassociated from load, and I think you'd have more instances. And I'm kind of thinking about this on the fly, but I think you would have more instances where you'd have to have more market power mitigation take place because of entities trying to chase those revenues as opposed to just bidding their cost and letting the optimization work.
And not only that, I think that, you know, there's already a challenge in LMP style markets of maintaining appropriate capacity because the market incentives change.
And if you strip down to every period being solely recovery of marginal costs, you no longer cover your fixed costs in any way as a generator.
Commissioner Harvey, do you have a question?
Well, this is the econ professor coming out. But the concept that Dave is talking about is called producer surplus. And Chris is correct that it's a way producers can cover their fixed costs, and other costs like that, common costs. But there's the sort of the mirror concept of consumer surplus. So if you take that straight line back and look at everything above it that's below the demand curve, that's consumers getting to get electricity at $60 instead of the $200, $300, $500 that's in that graph. So there are compensating things on both sides of the markets to some extent. But the main advantage is it allows producers to cover their fixed costs. But it's a rough guess, because obviously we have no idea what the fixed costs are.
But we assume that they're bidding them in sufficient to do that.
Well,
But we don't care, I guess. You know.
Well, the market theorists, so these are people that are gung-ho, no regulation type things, they would say no, they should bid in their marginal costs and cross their fingers. And that's kind of what the comment earlier was they'd have the incentive to bid their actual cost, marginal cost. We don't know if they really do or not. But their hope is they won't be the last resource selected. They'll be further down and they will cover some of their fixed, joint, and common costs. But yeah, that's the problem with market solutions for any company that has fixed cost is if it were actually an efficient market, they'd all go bankrupt because nobody covers their fixed costs. So yeah, that's just part of economics that hardly ever gets mentioned, but yeah, they would all go bankrupt if it was an efficient market with their fixed cost.
Can I ask, on that same thing, so at what point do they say, okay, that's it? Is it right up to 5 minutes before? Is it the day before? We're only talking day before on this.
This would be an example of the day ahead market where you have.
I know it's in the name, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. This would be happening each hour in the day ahead. This kind of
Okay.
alignment of supply and demand for each hour.
And in the real-time market, we'll kick in where the bids are, it was 60 minutes before for like the real time, where you have to have your bids in, or it could be updated.
Yeah, so each hour in real time, you have to have your bids for that hour locked 75 minutes before the start of the hour, and then kind of there's an FMM solution that's 22 and a half minutes before the start of the FMM interval, and then there's a solution every 7.5 minutes before the 5-minute interval. So we dispatch based on kind of updated 5-minute load forecasts, or 15-minute for the 15-minute market. And now it's just based on what is the actual load that the market needs to meet, no longer kind of just, the price for the load. The load is the load, and they dispatch resources to meet it. To finish off on kind of nodal pricing, so all of that we just went into is important to understand the marginal energy cost of the LMP, but essentially this concept of nodal pricing, right? It exists in EIM today. It's just being extended to EDAM we'll now have day-ahead prices at all of our nodes. And this is, right, what the load pays, what generators are paid. It consists of multiple components. So we already went over the marginal energy cost, the bid price of of the generator that would serve the next megawatt of demand. There's a marginal cost of congestion. Easiest way to think about this for me is the cost of transmission congestion. So this occurs when the generation that is cheapest to serve the load can't actually get there because of a binding transmission constraint on the system. So it's kind of an inefficiency in the market solution because of the realities of the electric grid. And then the marginal cost of losses. So this is transmission losses that occur, when electrons travel over large distances due to electrical resistance. So this is just pricing in that. And the whole goal of this is just at each load and resource node to get the most accurate representation of what it costs to serve an additional megawatt of load at that location, or for a generator to inject an additional megawatt.
A plug for the CAISO price maps. I love looking at their maps. the color differences tell you a lot about transmission constraints on the
Yeah.
plans.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I did want to touch on is the marginal GHG cost. So in EDAM, this will be $0 in non-GHG areas. So for example, Utah. In GHG areas, this takes on a positive price at times when this area is a net importer. And essentially what it just reflects is the cost of compliance with that, emissions program with this, marginal import into. So if the area is net importer, and it's over the evening peak, this is, in EDAM, we might see $10, and it would just reflect in LMPs for that state. And I have one more slide on GHG.
Can I give you a hypothetical about that?
Yes.
Assume, maybe this is on your slide, I only glanced at it. Assume that PacifiCorp is successful in getting 100% no-cost allowances for Chehalis. Would that bid include a zero GHG cost, or would it be accounted for somehow differently? Or do you not know yet?
Yeah, let me flip to that slide because
Okay, yeah.
it is.
I'm happy to do that. I have to discuss some follow-up questions on pricing, but follow this thread and we'll come back to it.
Okay. Yeah, so I think
Sorry,
what you're talking about here, just so everyone's on the same page, so inside a GHG zone, these generators, that are subject to the carbon emissions program of their state, they bid the cost of compliance with that program in their energy bid, whereas, in a thermal unit in Utah, it just bids what their marginal cost is. So for these resources, right, inside California and Washington, eventually, they, a gas plant there might have a $20 fixed cost plus $10 cost of carbon, so their bid is $30. That same gas plant, if we paste it in Utah, now has an energy bid of $20, so there's a $10 spread. So what we do is, there's this voluntary framework where generators outside the GHG zone, like in Utah, they can submit a GHG bid adder that the market only considers kind of when dispatching gen outside the GHG zone to serve load in the GHG zone. So now when the market's considering, hey, I have this load I need to serve in Washington, I can serve it with a gas plant in Idaho, they see that $10. So now those two gas plants are really seen as kind of equal, because when that megawatt that gets imported into the GHG zone, it carries a compliance obligation. So, and this is revenue generating for those generators that aren't part of that program, because you're always paid the cost of compliance or higher, and those revenues are distributed through net power costs.
But if you're self-scheduling Chehalis for dispatch into Washington, right now you've got, it seems to me, you've got to either you've got to do some sort of averaging of the actual compliance cost, or segregate the bid into a Washington component and a non-Washington component. And I suspect if you get the allocation changed, it gets a lot simpler, but I don't know. I'm just trying to tease that out a little bit. And we don't have to dwell on that too much here because it's not necessarily integral to EDAM, but it's something at some point I'd like to understand.
Yeah, I can say,
Yeah,
good, Mike.
Oh, go ahead, Doug.
I'll kick it off and then maybe Mike could correct me where I go wrong, but right now, the Washington GHG costs we incur is where we'll look at the Chehalis generation, and it's just the allocation not related to Washington that we have to purchase allowances for. And now with the new 2026 protocol, with 100% of Chehalis allocated to Washington, all free allowances, so like our dispatch models, we would take out that GHG cost, no GHG costs would be passed on to any of the states. So yeah, it would be at zero allowances needing to be purchased for Chehalis.
I think that since this is actually a different docket in front of the commission, we should probably talk about it elsewhere.
The allocation question, you mean?
Yes.
And Mike, did you want to? Oh, go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry. We finished. Mike, did I miss anything, or is that?
Oh, no, I think we can move on to, Michelle's right, we do have the allocation docket.
For pricing questions.
Yeah, this is probably more of a governance question than specifically about pricing, but I understand what we've been talking about is how how pricing can affect dispatch, but there are decisions that get made, presumably, that affect the pricing from a management perspective. You know, what sorts of policies are adopted about, you know, how certain resources get valued that will feed into the pricing. How does that get determined? Like, who makes the decisions about what sorts of resources are valued and when, and what sorts of situations get higher or lower prices?
Are you talking about how the resources actually decide to price their bids, or, I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, so, yeah, I mean, there were some comments filed on a straw proposal that the CAISO management put out, I don't know what it was, 3 weeks ago or something, on scarcity pricing and you know, what was it? Scarcity pricing and market power mitigation. I'm not gonna pretend I understand either one of those things, but what I do get out of that is that somebody somewhere is making decisions about what the inputs are on the pricing model, you know. And I'm just curious from a governance perspective, who's making those decisions, and does that change over time, and how does it change?
Yeah, so the scarcity pricing initiative is something that, you know, PacifiCorp has been an active participant in, and that, you know, includes stakeholders from, you know, all the EIM entities. It's the majority of that discussion has actually been centered around the EIM, rather than EDAM, so far, but yeah, there's a variety of stakeholders, and it follows the CAISO's stakeholder, you know, traditional stakeholder process, and essentially, you know, what that scarcity pricing initiative is really looking at is these situations where, you know, I talked about the $1,000 bid cap that's traditionally in place. This is in scarce conditions. When we lift that, you know, other ISOs that are full RTOs, they're able to kind of base it on ancillary service reserves. So as you get less, you know, surplus ancillary reserves, the price ticks up, you know, up to $8,000 in ERCOT, for example. For EIM, they're having to kind of look at it a little differently because obviously ancillary services are not procured in that market, nor will they be in EDAM at go live. So scarcity pricing, that initiative is essentially everyone coming together to figure out, are there some, you know, metrics that we want to use to figure out how, you know, to best reflect these scarce conditions and prices. And the concerns that you bring up, right, about, you know, have been weighed in that initiative, I think, in some of the comments of kind of considering, right, you want to send these price signals so that on these scarce days you bring supply to the market, right, without, you know, sending prices exorbitantly higher than what really the needs of the system are. So it's kind of, you know, a trade-off between those two.
Yeah, my comment was really less about the specific policies being debated, but rather who makes the decisions about the debate, right? So you guys are submitting comments, which suggests to me you're not ultimately the decision maker here. Somebody is, and that somebody can, you know, makes those decisions for whom, and you know who are they primarily view as their constituents, and how does that change over time as you've got the, you know, the Pathways Initiative is coming, there's going to be some changes in how this all gets. I'm just wondering if you can comment on who's making the decisions now and how that changes.
Well, in general, in stakeholder processes, and Kirstine can help me on this one, you know, they recognizing that CAISO has a lot of stakeholders, you know, every market participant, whether it's IPP or utility, and they'll go through a process that's very rigorous to, you know, come up with the straw proposals, everything. But in terms of who's the actual decision maker, it's...
Well, yeah, and I think Mike touched on it earlier. So when P&M signed their implementation agreement, kind of a big change happened. May or may not have been particularly obvious to a lot of folks, but we went from kind of dual authority where the CAISO board and the WEM board of governors had to, you know, make a joint decision. When P&M signed their implementation agreement, that switched to the WEM governing body having primary authority with 205 filing rights at FERC, where they would have what they call a jump ball to have, you know, if they cannot agree, the two bodies, they could both submit their best proposal to FERC, and FERC would have to make that decision. Now that the Pathways bill has been approved, and I believe the initial board, the high-level plan is that sometime middle of next year they're going to start seating the board of that new organization, but starting in 2020, Q1 of 2028, I believe, and Michelle, I think that's it, right? That at that point, the new regional organization that, you know, at that point will have a new board, will not be seated by the California governor, none of that, will be fully independent, will have sole authority over all market rules. So I think that's a long answer to who has
That's exactly
authority.
what I was looking
It's
for.
improved with PNM, thank you PMM, to hit that threshold, and we're already much better off than we have been in the past with these decisions. And starting in 2028, and as the new board gets seated, it'll be a fully regional independent entity over all market roles. Did that answer your question?
It does to a degree. I mean, there's still that 2-year period where it's not that. But how do decisions get brought to that new independent board in Q1 of 2028? Who has control over that, or do they control it?
I think
Is that gonna be
we're
up to them
currently,
later, TBD?
well, we're actually currently trying to figure all this out, everything from, you know, budgets to how we're gonna be staffing it, what type of resources will the new organization actually have in-house versus what, you know, will there be a separate kind of legal staff, will they have a separate policy staff, will they contract for some of those? So some of these things are currently being under negotiations, you know, and to some degree, we're all still very excited that the bill actually got ink on it, right? It may or may not be dry quite yet, so there is kind of a lot of effort going on right now to do.
And the stakeholder process is one that isn't particularly still being worked through.
And there's a market monitor on the back end.
But even that is also, like, the market monitor and the oversight, independent, the kind of independent oversight is also being particularly evaluated right now.
I think we have an opportunity here, you know, while that will be, as Mike mentioned earlier, you know, we're all gonna get a lot more work and a lot more things to read going forward and to opine and write comments on. But the good opportunity with this is it will be very public and there will be a lot of process, a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of different stakeholder processes that are being brought on board to support the RO. They're looking to repurpose and re-leverage the Regional Issues Forum. You know, so we've attempted collectively in the Pathways Initiative to really be much more inclusive and, you know, not just give the illusion of independence, but actually do a real solid job of it. So yes, you have a point that there's that 2-year, you know, transitional period there. And I would like to point out the WEM governing body now has ability to go fight it out with the CAISA board.
Because it's already, it's not
No,
like
I get it.
Yeah.
status quo.
Yeah, I
We're
wasn't really trying to raise a
set
point, it
there.
was just an observation, that
Yeah.
you've got, you know, the new regime takes place, but not for another couple of years.
But we're already in a new regime.
From the past,
From
yes.
the past,
But then it's a interim regime.
It's interim, but
Yeah.
a very good step forward.
So, just out of curiosity, what happens if PNM decides to leave? Does it all revert back? Do we not, I mean,
I don't remember the actual legality of this. As we mentioned previous to that, you know, there's a certain number of kind of a load ratio share that needs to be made. Now, the next entities that are presumably going to announce are expected to be in Nevada. You know, so that would still be ticked, that box.
It doesn't revert back from New Mexico. But if, and especially because it would already have been backfilled by other new entrants. Because the trigger wasn't New Mexico, the trigger was, you know, a numerical one.
Okay.
And so now, I don't think we ever included like kind of unwinding provisions, but if enough happened, then there would be, you know, an outcry, and then I think that would have to be discussed.
okay.
Maybe we do a little time check, so I think we got 20 minutes more.
Okay.
We got 14 slides, I don't know, make sure customers are getting what they want, as far as how much
the
time.
commission scheduled it all the way to 4.
Yeah, I think we did schedule this to 4 o'clock.
I mean,
Okay.
none of us will complain if it ends early, but they did put it on their website till 4.
Okay.
We want you to have a chance to say what you want to say, so
Yeah.
take the time you need.
I think the only thing that I was going to touch on, and Mike mentioned this earlier, that PacifiCorp will retain its balancing authority area responsibilities, maintaining system reliability within its 2 balancing authority areas, and the CAISO doesn't impose penalties on EDAM EAs for taking reliability measures. The EDAM does not impose California laws on market participants. The EDAM tariff is governed by FERC, as is the PacifiCorp tariff. And we discussed the carbon allowance costs and how those are reflected and accounted in the market, and how non-GHG areas are insulated from those costs. And just, in EDAM, as in the EIM today, PacifiCorp will continue to manage its system in the best interest of its customers in the states we operate in.
Can I, real quick, or however long, whatever. A few years ago, 6 or 7 maybe not that long, there was the whole controversy in the ISO over like emergency priority wheel through kind of stuff. And I won't pretend to really understand what was going on there, but I know a lot of folks, like particularly Arizona and places like that, were really upset and feeling like ISO rules were going to favor native load in that context. How is that issue avoided here?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. And I just want to be clear, like, that was not a market issue and not a market rule. That was kind of this, I don't know, this unique of using, that came from essentially Arizona and others using the California ISO as a transmission service provider and essentially being a transmission customer for those for the market, and CAISO does not have kind of firm point-to-point rights. Like, they don't have an O. They're under a different construct with financial rights, and so what would happen is they would buy energy from the Northwest, and the way they would get it to the Southwest is they would inject it in Northern California into the CAISO and withdraw it in Southern California, and the CAISO would optimize that through, and it would be an import and an export, 2 bids. Well, you're right. The rules that they said, hey, if you do that, we're going to treat it as 2 separate bids, basically, and that really upset some people. But the CAISO has gone through a couple stakeholder processes, a couple iterations, and what they have done now is it's still not a firm point-to-point reservation, but they've allowed you for load-serving entities to reserve transmission at the interties. So, Arizona, whoever it is, can reserve transmission at the intertie, and they post that periodically, and you can, different periods. We don't use it that much. That's why I'm not super familiar with the kind of mechanics and the process of it, but you can reserve transmission at the interties now, and so that was kind of the last iteration and where it evolved to over time. But
So
I think it's largely
success
fixed.
story.
I don't hear complaints about it anymore. So.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, I think I'm handing these next 2 slides back to you.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm just going to go over the next 2 slides. There was a question about transmission in EDAM and how that's different in EIM. So I thought maybe just starting off with where we are today in EIM. So in EIM, those transfers between the different BAs and the different EIM entities can be supported by different transmission rights or scheduling rights. So point-to-point customers, they can offer their rights into the market. Anything that is available that's kind of unscheduled going into the hour can be used by the market. It's really kind of this idea that not all transmission is being used. So once you move into that hour, the market can use whatever is kind of left over and unscheduled. And there's no hurdle rate for that, which allows the model to optimize those transfers. And there's no direct compensation for the EIM transmission that's offered. But that's all just, again, it's kind of utilizing whatever is available, what's left unused in the market. And then, some entities can leave rights open for the market to use as well. But in EDAM, it's going to be a little bit different. So if we go to slide 22, there are different ways that transmission will make it into the market. And in the initial market design and kind of through the process, we referred to these as buckets, or the CAISO did. We have now gone from 3 buckets to 4 types, and the buckets in bucket 2 had kind of some subtypes, but now we're in 4 types. When they drew the line between the buckets and the types, they did not draw straight lines. They so bucket 1 is like now type 3. So I don't know why that happened, but I'll just go through and how the different transmission makes its way into the EDAM market. And so the first is, and we call these transfer system resources. So these are resources, or really transmission resources, that can be used to facilitate transfers between the different BAs or the different EDAM entities. So the first one is just our bilateral energy transactions between the BAs that are submitted as self-scheduled interchange. So, we're buying and we're bringing energy into our market, or we sold something, or somebody in our BA sold something to outside our BA. That's going to be self-scheduled interchange, but the market will have visibility in that, what transmission is being used to facilitate that transfer, so that it can make sure that that self-schedule takes place. The next one can be firm point-to-point rights that are contributed by the customer or the rights holder. So this could be, anyone that holds point-to-point rights in our BA. For example, it could be the front office, energy supply management. We have different rights to different market hubs and different interties. And so if we are not using those rights every day before 10 a.m., we can make those rights available to the market. And if the market uses those transmission rights to facilitate a transfer, we will get that transfer revenue directly back to the PacifiCorp load. And so if it was another entity that owned those transmission rights, they have the same opportunity where they can make those rights available, and the rights holder gets direct settlement for their share of the transfer revenue from the CAISO, from the market. And the one nuance there is, once you kind of contribute those transmission rights to the market, you can't claw them back. You've made those available for day-ahead optimization all the way through real time. And then the type 3 is everything that you show in the resource sufficiency evaluation. So you show you have enough resources and enough transmission to serve your load in the resource sufficiency evaluation. And basically, if you show that you need that transmission to serve your resources, that transmission is now available to the market to optimize, along with all the generation that is bidding in, and then obviously to serve your load or the load that you have. And then the type 4 is available transmission capacity that is unscheduled or unsold by the EDAM entity or the transmission service provider prior to 10 a.m. So if a firm point-to-point holder doesn't schedule their transmission say they have 100 megawatts of transmission, they schedule 70 of it, then that 30 megawatts automatically gets made available to the market, and the market will use that for optimization. However, this one does come with a nuance because the customer did not voluntarily make it available to the market. The customer continues to maintain their rights, and they can go back and make schedule changes, and they could up their schedule from 70 all the way up to their 100 megawatts in that example. And so say they did that, in real time, the market will re-optimize that to allow for that 30 megawatts to flow, that incremental schedule change. But that transmission holder will be subject to any congestion, any congestion caused by that schedule change. So Doug will talk about that more. So I think that's the biggest difference. That's a big difference. But EIM is really just whatever's left and whatever's available in the market for that hour. And in EDAM, it's going to be a lot more deliberate on what transmission gets provided to the market. So, and I apologize. I didn't realize this was scheduled till 4. I do need to drop at but I'm going to turn it over to Doug. But I do need to drop at the hour. But really appreciate you having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got about 7 slides here on congestion. I'm going to talk about what it is, how material it is expected to be in the EDAM, and then how we're going to kind of allocate those congestion charges that are incurred in RBA. So first slide, talk a little bit about just the congestion and the fact that we are already paying congestion costs today. You know, it is congested transmission lines that give you the kind of the business case for new transmission builds. Everybody, Utah is paying their pro rata share of redispatch costs. For example, when one transmission line gets congested and the cheaper resource can't make it to the load and a higher priced resource has to be instructed up, those costs will be incurred and passed on to customers. Wind curtailments driven by congestion, network studies, and also in the EIM, we're also currently paying congestion pricing for the EIM. A quick little example here of congestion. I was kind of debating on how many examples of what congestion is to put in here. This is a very simple one. So we have a green triangle here for a generator. Let's assume that generator has a locational marginal price of $10 a megawatt hour, and it has a load to serve up there in orange. And let's say because of congestion, it can't serve all of that load. So another higher price resource for $20 is also dispatched to serve that load. And as we talked about earlier, you could only have one kind of closing LMP price per interval. So you get this difference here due to congestion. So that $10 here cost incurred by this generator serving that load is just kind of the type of a congestion cost I'll be talking about. And how do you, what happens to that amount collected? Because they're going to collect $20 from the load, and only $10 will be paid to the generator. So that extra $10 has to go somewhere. And this kind of goes back to where nobody else outside of our BA is entitled to that $10. So the CAISA will make sure that it does come back to us. Yep, Mr. Harvey?
How does the $20 generator get paid then?
So then if there's an additional generator, because I'm not shown on here, that was $20, he would also be paid from that load. So the load will pay the $20 for the incremental megawatt hours that generator provided, and then that generator would also have, the generators are all at different nodes. The load just has one price for the whole BA, So that on the other generator that's not shown, yeah, it would be receive $20 that would come from that load.
So it's
But
only,
then-
so if it was, say, 10 megawatts of load and 2 of it was served by the 20, the 2 would get 20 and the refund would be on the 8.
Yeah, and the refund would be needing, it would end up in a charge code that the CAISO calls like the congestion offset. And that's where kind of, there's a big kind of the 3 major topics for our transmission customers and the UAMPS, Deserets, and our stakeholders was congestion. You know, they've got wheel throughs coming through our BA that where they inject in, you know, they'll get paid for that injection, and then as they leave the BA with the export going out, they'll have to pay. And so they're subject to that pricing differential, which I'll call this like a congestion differential. So yeah, they were very concerned about losing that. You know, they're paying a certain amount to wheel through our BA, and then they're also being, you know, subject to that. So, you know, where we started, it was more of a measured demand allocation of those revenues back to all of our participants in our area. But then, as I'll talk about, our allocation evolved to more very specifics and just seeing, you know, which particular path caused that congestion and making sure if he gave up $10 that he will get back $10. So we provided a path for that to happen. Good question. I know Danny, you mind putting it forward one, or you already got it? So this slide talks about just the materiality of congestion costs. Rattle did perform a study of EIM congestion going from our east to west balancing authority area from the years 2019 to 2024, and they did see, just get in as far as materiality, it was like 70 cents a megawatt hour is the average cost incurred during that time. So this was, you know, we had PowerX came in as one of our folks entering comments on the tariff, and they're a very strong stakeholder in the Markets Plus, and they had thrown out that, you know, our customers were exposed to $13 a megawatt hour, but Rattle study showed it was on average $70 cents a megawatt hour. The next section here, we do have kind of listed out what the kind of the peaks and the minimums were. It was at kind of a maximum congestion costs that were incurred were $35.90 a megawatt hour. That was back in the first quarter of 2024, one of our winter storms. And then they also looked at what the kind of the minimum was, and actually it was some folks at most received credits of $11.50 a megawatt hour in the third quarter of 2022. It was back when power was flowing from the Pacific Northwest to the desert Southwest. So you can see there's definitely some volatility. What we learned from that study is there's volatility in the congestion. That does help average it out over time. And then, you know, as flows change, it also, you know, by season with all the diversity and how the flows change, it also kind of helps reduce down our risk over time. So all in all, with this study based on EIM, congestion was not a major factor. Yep, Commissioner Harvey.
Just a question, for a general theory, I guess. The Rattle study, this congestion revenue is a benefit. I'm curious, why would be considered a benefit from PacifiCorp's or ratepayers' perspective? Because if it's charged and revenue's coming in, that means loads paying it as well. So I'm curious why it gets talked about as being a benefit.
I don't know if as far as the congestion being considered a benefit, did I say that, or was it?
Well, no, I said the Rattle study, when it
Yeah.
was presented at various EDAM workshops, they always said a congestion revenue will be X gazillion dollars, and that's a benefit.
Yeah.
I always thought, well, somebody's paying that, so why isn't it just wash out? Why would it be thought of as benefit?
Yeah, that wasn't the sole source of the benefits, but in terms of just power being able to flow from the lower priced area to a higher priced area and receive the basically a margin in terms of that benefit, and then
So I mean, that helps the generator.
yeah.
But the load is still paying that higher price.
Yeah.
So I guess I was just intrigued why it was, some people thought of it as a benefit.
Yeah, I don't know, Danielle, in terms of like the total benefits of the Brattle study, I don't know if the congestion was a big headliner in terms
Well,
of.
it was like 30% of the benefits for the Brattle study, at least the Brattle study I saw.
Yeah, I'll,
Anyway, you can move on,
yeah,
that's
okay,
fine.
keep going, thank you. Good question though.
Well, yeah, so, well, sorry, you can't move on. So slide 4, slide 4, it says EDAM congestion revenues, positive 141 million. Why is that a benefit? That's another benefit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that one, all right.
Okay.
Sorry
It's
about
not clear how the load costs are broken out in this
Yeah.
table, because it's just a summary, so.
Yeah.
You can get
Yeah,
back to it,
sorry,
that's fine,
sorry,
move on.
sorry on that one. So slide 24, so we're on our 25, thank you, Danny. So historical EIM congestion, one comment there, it's not considered indicative of what we'll experience in the EDAM. That was, people trying to speculate what the congestion risk will be in EDAM, kind of pointed to what they saw in the EIM. So Brattle did do a study to address that. They analysis found congestion between PacifiCorp's east and west for the $12 million per year. So this is actually the forecasted. This last slide, sorry, talked about historical EIM. Brattle also looked at the future anticipated impact in the EDAM of congestion, and they concluded about $12 million per year was PacifiCorp's portion of the total $1.372 billion in the footprint. CAISO was kind of the big congestion occurrence area. So then based on that study, we did have a lower kind of forecasted anticipated congestion impact in our control area. So it's basically the congestion, knowing that the historical EIM is not going to be really that indicative of what we experience in the EDAM. In the EIM, we're starting the market with a base schedule that's not optimized to take into account all the imports or exports that could occur. So we are expecting the profile of congestion to be a lot different than EDAM. So where CAISO is actually determining the day-ahead schedule, and then the real-time schedule will start from that. That will relieve some of the congestion causes. We also expect that more transmission will be available in the EDAM as you look across all the EDAM footprint and the transmission bills considered in there. Also, just for existing transmission lines in the EIM, there are certain restrictions or flow gates that don't allow that much transmission to be used in just the real-time market or imbalance period. Bonneville has a lot of flow gates to where, in the EIM real-time market, you're only allowed to move additionally, X amount of megawatts. Now in the EDAM, with the full day-ahead schedule, it opens up a lot more capacity. So the more capacity available, the less kind of risk of congestion. 26 there. Okay, so just some further points about congestion in the EDAM. First point, just, all bid-based security constrained economic dispatch models and the different CAISOs, MISOs, ERCOTs across the United States all have, the energy congestion losses components. Congestion isn't novel to the CAISO. Congestion pricing is a critical component. Depending on the direction, particular schedule in relation to the congestion patterns will determine if you receive or pay congestion differentials. Under the CAISO's approved tariff, congestion revenue allocation to PacifiCorp from CAISO all will be returned to RBA, or I'll talk about the kind of the details of what will be returned. And then treatment of congestion revenue received, significant attention to the stakeholder process is what I noted there. So, a lot of stakeholder meetings, a lot of discussions related to congestion. On this slide, talking about that, it's kind of an overview of what CAISO will return back to us as far as congestion differentials. So CAISO is gonna collect all the congestion costs and credits, put it into a single charge code bucket, and give it back to us to allocate to our market participants within our control area. And initially, when we talked about how to allocate that bucket of congestion, it was gonna be based on a measured demand, based on, you know, how much load or exports you had in the control area. Caused a lot of concern because it wasn't kind of cost-based or enough to go back to the person that actually had the risk of the congestion. So what we determined was that CAISO we will guarantee like a full congestion offset for certain qualified schedules, which people have the ability to create. And they're gonna return all of that congestion to us, and additionally, all the congestion related constraints that bound in our control area, except for what directly related to CAISO's qualified schedules. And then the next slide, I'll get into a little bit to what those kind of, what makes up a qualified schedule. But, so you go on the next one there, Danny. So, for what we receive from the CAISO, or within our BA, if any point-to-point customer or network customer has a balanced self-schedule that's either a monthly or longer term, firm or conditional firm, will guarantee that their congestion costs that they incur will be returned to them to offset that. So this is what would really kind of appease majority of the stakeholders, the folks that were just wheeling through the point-to-point customers, which we have a lot of, that so we gave that right to them. For the folks that did economically bid or did not want to self-schedule, they could also receive that. Yep, questions? Commissioner Harvey?
I was gonna let you finish your
That's
sentence,
right.
but for the balanced self-schedules, these are people that have transmission rights?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, firm transmission rights, monthly or longer term. So yeah, so a lot of the wheel through customers, market participants, had the concern about paying the point-to-point rate for under our tariff, and then also still being exposed to that risk. So we relieved that risk from them, but made it optional. So they could not have a balanced self-schedule. They didn't have to self-schedule it. They could economically bid it, and they wouldn't get that returned to them. So, so our first step is to make sure those folks get their congestion risk completely mitigated. So we'll use those pool of dollars that are in the congestion offset bucket, give that first to them, and then the amounts left over are given to the other market participants based on their load share or export share, and that's step 2. So for the folks here, we make sure none of the folks that got their congestion return in step 1 are in this bucket, so everybody else gets kind of a load ratio share of the congestion return to them.
Just a clarification on one.
Yep.
The last part of there says they've made reservations prior to adoption of EDAM. Is it anticipated that this group is gonna shrink over time as contracts expire?
I think for the most, we have had, like for example, PowerX that did terminate their rights with us, but the fact that it is monthly, any new monthly schedule can still get this, or any new long 5-year, 1-year agreement can get this. We do expect people to continue to renew. I don't think this is, we're not doing anything to scare those point-to-point customers off, so we expect them to continue at the same rate, except for maybe the folks that are maybe dedicated to Markets Plus. And that's what I had for the congestion. Any questions on that?
Okay.
Kirsten's
Well,
gonna.
Thank
kick
you.
it off.
So we'll switch from kind of the design and, you know, the way I like to akin this is almost like the architects come in and they do the design of the home with all the fake trees and all the windows and slimes, you know, light streams in and all this stuff, and then at some point they hand it over to the GC and the contractors, and really nobody has much interest as to what happens between the design and then until they can move in, okay? So I happen to oversee the work and the implementation. We have a very large team. So I have good news and bad news for you. So the good news is I have 4 slides before we're done. The further good news is on on November 20th, we have an all-day workshop here, one at our offices as well as in Portland. Many of you may have already received an invitation to that. We have both in-person and virtual options. My super nerdy team on the implementation, you know, that deals with testing and all these other kind of behind the scenes topics. We're gonna give a little bit of an overview of what all that involves. For those of you interested, we believe that would provide a little bit further, you know, peek behind the curtain, education, understanding of how the actual things will happen. As well as a little bit of a one-on-one. So the last slide in here is that invitation many of you have already seen. So with that, I'm just gonna highlight really briefly where we're at. I'm happy to answer any questions. I could literally talk until tomorrow, 4 p.m. I'm not going to do that. So with that, the first slide you have here is really, I borrowed this from the CAISO. This is our basic implementation schedule. The orange line indicates obviously we are here. We've been at this for some time. We've had a lot of big wins, a lot of challenges already kind of that we had to sort out. And we are through the connectivity testing, which really means that our systems, you know, if you think of this almost as a pipe, we've established that we can connect to their systems. We've then gone through and made sure the data can go both ways and can be validated properly. We just started market simulation. That is really the first part is a structured piece where the CAISO has identified certain scenarios that they want us and many others to test to just make sure that their things work, their tech works. You know, we find stuff that doesn't work on a daily basis that is to be expected. We are doing a new thing. The CAISO's building a new engine. We are building our piece to it as PacifiCorp with all of our new systems. That is going to be a very engaged process. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means practically speaking. We are then going to roll into unstructured testing. This is really a time for the various departments at PacifiCorp as well as our third-party customers and our transmission customers to really come up with our own scenarios and things in kind of a sandbox where we get to test. You know, the software developers, we always say we like to break the system and make sure that it actually works in all the edge conditions. So my team's having fun coming up with scenarios to see all the hypotheticals on what could be done so we can actually make sure the technology works when we actually need it. So that will get us through January. And then we actually on February 2nd, PacifiCorp will start parallel operations in EDAM. And there will actually then, at this point, that's a big day for us because a lot of things have to come together. And I'll talk about this here in a minute on just, you know, it sounds a little simple that we start doing this, but we have to have all the tech built, all the training done. We have to have everybody registered, all the legal documents signed. And we'll do 8 weeks of parallel operations. There will be reporting coming out of that and a lot of information. And then we go live May 1. So unceremoniously, let's move to the next slide, please.
Will you have any indication, so on the parallel operations phase, you're obviously gonna, you know, get your feet wet a little more than in the market simulation, right?
Yes. Yeah.
How much of a sense during that period will you also be seeing the economics of it? I mean, obviously you're not gonna do settlements and stuff, but.
Well, there will be settlement reports, right? We're simulating the full thing.
The whole thing, okay.
Now, I'll talk about some caveats in terms of there will still be, and this is, I think sometimes people are surprised when they hear that during parallel ops, there will still be stuff breaking and or we will find little bugs and someone on a keyboard will manipulate some code to fix that, and then we have to retest. So there will be a lot of testing going on, and the full suite of all the way down to settlement reports. So there will be, we'll have a kind of what we call a tiger team, where we have representatives from each department. So every day when we get the simulated market results and all the implications, we have an ability to take a look at this and say, that doesn't look right. What's wrong here? This is missing. So, it is fully intending to simulate actual operations. Now, towards the end of parallel ops, it'll be much more realistic than maybe the first week, to be very honest. But no, we will have our IT support. Ideally, everything that we need in real operations will need to be done there. We'll have staff in different areas to separate them from their regular jobs to really do that simulation. And along with the other customers that are going into the market with us. But right now, to your point, will we see how meaningful is that economic data? The other thing is PAC's going in with just the KISO. So it's just, like limited transfer points. Mike mentioned this earlier. We're working on opening up others.
And I'm less concerned with the value proposition
Yeah.
than the understanding you get from seeing it, right?
I mean, there's going to be a lot of off-ramps, and there better be, we will have to have readiness criterias. We will have to be very rigorous to jump through these hoops, because on May 1, we're going live in EDAM, which now includes EIM, right? So we would be switching over completely. So we're not taking that lightly, and if there's really any kind of issues that we would see technology-wise or market design flaws that we discover, then we have off-ramps to do that. Cool. At this point, we're not anticipating any, but these type of things, we're gonna be the first ones out of the gate. I always say we're gonna land, the goal is to land the plane. It may not be pretty,
It sounds fun and stressful.
Yeah, it is both of those things, I will admit. So, can I get the next slide? So I will go into that a lot more if you decide to join us nerds in the implementation workshop, but there is a ton of work streams that our team is doing. We have a kind of a large extended team that includes a lot of kind of subject matter, SME, we have settlements experts, and we have transmission services experts, and I've given up a long time ago attempting to put all of that stuff in this one brain, or, it's just too complex. And, but just on the IT upgrade system piece, we have 4 key systems that we're upgrading, and each vendor is literally designing and interpreting kind of what the EDAM design is and building it. So those are like the PCI for the front office, OD for transmission, MCG for grid operations, power settlements for settlements. And then we have another 10 other systems that we either built, because some of those, for instance, we have a new system for JLS that will allow other third-party customers to have an easier access and get information from metering points that they will need for settlements with the KISO from from PAC-owned meters. So every chance we have, we're trying to, future build, make things smoother, automate, transparency, these type of things. We also have new LMP forecasting models. We're really kind of pulling a full, best-in-class stack together to really maximize and go into this market with the eyes wide open, and to have the tools in place for us to really maximize the benefits and candidly also spot any kind of risk and minimize those. So lots going on the IT side. Happy to bore you more or answer any specific questions. OAT tariff, we just talked about that. That has been a long process. We're very delighted it finally got approved. And on Monday, we'll do our compliance filing. Business practices, you may have heard, but both the KISO has a set of business practices that they're still finalizing with their OAT tariff. PacifiCorp has been very busy working on ours. We're kind of on I think a V1 or V2. That will be finalized and multiple more versions being published. I'll go over that timeline. Customer engagement, both at the tariff as well as, and I think, this whole thing about, well, people in our BAs are coming with us, right? And not everybody was always super excited, is perhaps the way to say it. So we've chosen to intentionally take kind of a much more customer first without sounding too cliche and lame in that regard. But, you know, we have really stood up and have really tried to listen of what the customers wanted. So we've been running customer workshops, demoing different information. You know, we're planning on demoing portals that the customers are gonna need to use and get to use. And are really trying to be a lot more information forward, as well as we have, you know, take input and comments. We have a lot of stakeholders and a lot of customers, so this has been a big lift for our organization. Frankly, I've been very impressed with the transmission services team, who's been really standing this up, and you know, we are getting less questions, and people are getting ready to understand the different topics and know what they need to do in their respective organizations, which is frankly where we should be. And I'm encouraged, kind of from my vantage point, that that's been a successful effort, at least from where I sit. There's lots of training. There's the CAISO market training, there's digital trainings, there's computer modules, there's in person. We are now to the point where the vendors, as they finish the software, each one of them is going to create their own vendor training. Everybody has to go through it. Then we have to actually have the process training, which is each person that has a certain job, you know, documentation and training on which button they need to push, how and when, although a lot of it will get automated, you know. But that has been an incredible big feat. PacifiCorp is a large organization. We ended up partnering with the CAISO, and one of the innovation that got me excited, the rest, you know, but we have a learning management system in-house at PacifiCorp. And the whole prospect of me being able to certify that everybody who needed a particular training has actually done it. So we ended up working with the CAISO to come up with them adopting a new system, so we get full access in real time to all the trainings they put out, and I can push that through my learning management system and assign it to all my staff. And then I get to see who all did it, and I can make it the manager's problem and no longer mine, right? So then I have a certificate who completed it with what test score or such like. So we've done a lot of that. The training aspect will be ongoing. Testing, I'll have a separate slide on that. Let's just say that's a gift that keeps on giving. And then change management is everything from documenting new processes, documenting new procedures, how well the systems work, how well the data flows, you know, just making a very large, complex beast work and doing, you know, all the controls that need to be put in place. And so there's a lot of work that's going to be coming our way. If I could get the next slide.
Hey, before you move on to that, this is just merely curiosity.
Yeah.
So, on these 7 different EDAM implementation work streams, about how many employees do you have assigned to work on these things?
So I have kind of what I call an EDAM PMO, which is like my little project. So as I mentioned, my real job is overseeing market policy and analytics, right? So I've taken a kind of in addition assignment. So I oversee that. Essentially, most of the team that reports to me now has been moved into the PMO. I've hired a few external project managers. So my team in and of itself, which are existing employees already, they are being kind of repurposed for this and then go back to the business, frankly, much better trained, you know, like fully up to speed on that. There is, I'm looking around, Danny, there's how many of us, maybe 5, 6?
That are doing 2 jobs.
EDAM, well, no, there's multiple of us, but on the project management side, there is myself, the technical lead, folks like Danny. I can get back to you on this, but there's about 5.
You don't need to. I was
No,
just
but-
curious. It seems like there's, as you've described it, a lot of complexity.
massive.
So I was just trying to get an idea of how, the resources you've devoted to this internally as far as numbers of employees that are working on all these different things.
It is significantly less from what I heard about EIM. So we have taken, you know, so there's, the PMO is somewhere between 5 to 7, depending on, you know, how many things they're all doing. we did go out and hire Utilicast and some other to kind of get very specialized resources, experience in implementation. Frankly, what that also takes is stomach, right? This is, I mean, we have to have, you know, arguably a lot of folks that come and work for a utility, they don't sign up for this kind of chaos, right? And while I'm very excited for this change, this is a, you know, very, how do I say, very, very public, large product launch, right? Could not be more public. There's a lot hanging on to it. So there's a lot of pressure, internal and external. So we've gone and gotten some of those outside resources. I also have for each software product, the big four, I went outside and I retained project management resources that have experience just managing big, very kind of hairy IT projects. So we have a core team of about 5, then we have the next string of those technical resources that are consultants. They'll be with us until, I don't know, summer next year. And then we have each one of the departments has a lead. And we are now getting to the point where everybody gets the opportunity to pitch into EDAM and, you know, do extra testing and learning and training. So we've taken an approach. I really was serious about wanting to not just hire a consultant to come in soup to nuts as a very common model. Before I took this job, I went around to a lot of the other entities and heard how they liked their EIM implementation, how that went for them. The general feedback was that it's way easier if you hire a consulting firm. They come and then they go, and your staff has gotten very used to the other people doing the hard work and the stressful work, and they don't know enough about when you go live and kind of how the thing was built. So we took a little bit of a different approach in that regard intentionally, because we really wanted to have bench. So that also means we're not just gonna have one person that knows how to do something. We're training, you know, a bunch underneath each one. And so it is a, you know, it's a massive job. We're going first. We are, my analogy between the, you know, the architectural drawing on the map that had like 5 windows in here, but nowhere in there did it actually specify how big the windows are and how thick and how they opened, right? So we are having to do that all with the CAISO right now. So there's, you know, a lot of kind of innovation talent happening and operationalizing the design into something that can be done. PacifiCorp has really partnered with the CAISO on some of the aspects that, you know, there was a transmission element that the CAISO was in the initial design that we ended up having to redo because it didn't match well how the OAT tariffs, like how we actually did business outside of California, candidly. So, you know, we had to kind of go back, and now our software developers weren't overly happy because they had to redo some things they had already built, but we believe it's going to be a much better solution to support those type 1, 2, 3, and 4 things. So, large seeming team, you know, by the time EDAM goes live, we're going to shed the consultants, and, you know, we have kind of our existing staff taking over, and in fact, we're doing that in parallel ops already. But I'm happy during that implementation workshop, I should probably put something together to make that a little more obvious. So thank you for that question.
Well, that helps me to understand just the scope of the massive amount of work.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Okay, so I won't go through all of this, but the key up on top is essentially red is testing. So this is activities with the different scheduling coordinators. Of course, ESM is one of them at PacifiCorp, but we have UMs, Deseret, you know, all of those folks are included here. There is a lot of different efforts going on. There's, for instance, across all the customers, we spoke about converting non-participating resources to participating. There's about 20 of those units between all the customers. So we're needing to do some testing just that they actually can receive and follow dispatch signal. You know, this is not necessarily a required one, but this is one of those things, we're doing this the first time, I don't want to have these type of issues kind of become an issue. So we're doing some testing there. We are also doing testing on the various portals that we're creating. There's 3 new portals being created for customers to use, either to get metering data or to get their allocation of how much they need to bring to pass the RSE. So we have created a lot of different portals. We'll cover that in the workshop. I don't want to belabor this now here. Blue is business practices, and you can see here, you know, that there's going to be a few more volumes of business practices for all of you good folks to review who are interested, but we're hoping to have the final version available in January, and all of this is going to happen before we go into parallel ops, including completion of all the training. And then green, we are anticipating having some stragglers. A lot of our gen and load customers are working actively on becoming scheduling coordinators and registering with the CAISO. You know, a few of them may not make it over the line in time. So we are, PacifiCorp is providing, kind of anticipating having to help out towards the end. When it comes to load customers, we've actually anticipated, you know, and actually created kind of a fallback option where we have prepped for them, and then if they don't make it by go live or by a certain drop dead date, they can revert back once they're ready. So we've really tried to be thoughtful about what could go wrong and how can we make it easier and how can we anticipate it to make this as smooth as possible. And also recognizing that we are pulling a lot of these customers with us, and you know, at this point, we're all in this together, and we can't pass an RSA and be reliable if we don't have all these things dialed in. So we're taking a bit of a, you know, a really kind of a, I don't want to call it a white glove approach, but we're really kind of active and really are trying to anticipate what things could go wrong and kind of heading those off and having an A, B, C, and D plan in place. Last slide, if I may. So this is all the different testing. I referenced this. There is a few more other streams that I didn't even put on here, but essentially the CAISO testing is what the structure testing is that we just started on the 2nd. Those are really kind of structured scenarios. We do those on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The CAISO has told us what we need to do. All the EIM entities, PGE, everybody can test. And we are then also doing functional and vendor testing. So essentially some of our vendors have already provided us functionalities. Some of them we're still waiting. Some of them are a little behind, right? These kind of normal things given the number of systems we have. We have to, as soon as we get, they tested, once we get it in-house, we do testing with our users. And then we have to test that it can connect with the CAISO system. So there's a lot happening. We're using a lot of technology to frankly automate and track all of this to kind of highlight and bring it all together. And customer portal testing, we're just about to get started on providing that information. We've come up with scenarios for the customers to test. We're coordinating. Again, some of our consultants are helping with just a sheer outreach. We have a lot of customers, and there's a lot of just touching base and calling and orchestrating all of that that we've not really had to do before in that fashion. Adjacent BA testing, so that is really 14, we have 14 connected BAs to PacifiCorp. I mean, they're all staying in EIM, so really what the job is, we have to test with them individually and coordinate with them that when PacifiCorp goes into EDAM, their functionality in EIM does not get disrupted because we're so connected and intertied. The CAISO is involved in that in terms of kind of making sure that that all goes smoothly. So again, very large process, and there's bugs. We have systems to track them, there's systems to launch them. You know, it's a complex beast, and we're making good progress. I'm very, you know, for somebody in my position, I always wish we were further along already, but after all, I think we are where we should be, and nothing so far has really been overly surprising. And stuff breaks sometimes, but the CAISO has been responsive. All of our vendors have recognized that, you know, it's not going to be great if this doesn't work when we're the first ones to go. So really everybody is pulling together and really aligning on this. And at this point, I don't really have any major concerns to report. And the last slide is just kind of a copy and paste version of the invite some of you may have already received. We'll be bringing some of our consultants and some of the other you know, folks that can speak about various other pieces on the implementation. It will also have we've done what we call a bridge training for all of our staff. It's 4 hours, don't get scared, we won't subject you to that. We're gonna give you an abridged version, but this whole concept of really doubling down on here's exactly how PacifiCorp works in EIM, and here's all the things that are changing and why and how. We find that crosswalk has been incredibly helpful to our staff to actually understand the vernacular, the changes in the processes, and kind of crosswalking it over. So we're going to be providing that as well as, you know, an overview of what is all the stuff that we had hoped to get done by Go Live that is not going to be in the package. And some of that is actually driven by CAISO and their vendor Siemens is, you know, they're taking on a large piece here. Not all of it, we all start out with all the bells and whistles and kind of all the nice to haves. We're in that point now where we're having to start a list of, here's a day 2 functionality. What does that all mean? PacifiCorp also has certain things that we're looking at for day 2 that would be lovely to have and fantastic, and we started out with it, and as we are getting down, you know, to kind of the chute where we just have to get in and really have the core functionality needs to work well. All the other nice, awesome stuff will have to wait. So we're going to go over all of that as well to provide visibility what some of these things are, working closely with the CAISO. So I am done, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions. I'm also happy to give you 20 minutes back on your Friday.
Any questions from any participants here on the phone? I assume the training, the workshops will be at the North Temple office.
Yes. That is correct, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more or hearing any more questions from participants, so thank you very much for a wonderful
Thank you.
presentation.
Yeah, thank
All right,
all.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
Thank
you.
you.
I didn't know how much, because there's a lot I know.
Yeah,
I also like